Hello, I'm mischievous Mark Ginocchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy 15, and all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals, which I say do not count.
And I'm Dapper Dan Gavassan. I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man and Sensational Spider-Man, including the annuals, which I say definitely count, especially those sensational annuals. But for me, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains a fantasy.
Well, ain't that just sensational for you, Dan? Welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this Amazing Friends episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app, or your least favorite one, too. It doesn't really matter. But what does matter is if you leave us a review to help spread the word about our show. In fact, those reviews are really important. They seem maybe not so much, but they really do help us kind of give an indication of how many people are listening so that we can get more guests and collaborators on the show.
I think we're entering a time in our lives, Dan, where, you know, favorite, least favorite, it doesn't really matter anymore, as long as you just do the thing you're supposed to do, I guess. So, with that in mind, this podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members, who are always our favorite, regardless. If you want to receive early episodes and exclusive artwork and keep this podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and consider joining our Patreon.
You'll be surprised what money can buy you these days. Today on the show, Mark and I are going to be talking to writer Todd Dezago. Todd started his career at Marvel working under JM DeMatteis on the X Factor books before following him and Tom DeFalco into the Spider office during the middle of the Clone Saga. There, he wrote on the Spectacular Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, and helped to kick off the Maximum Clonage event and the rebooted titles under the Scarlet Spider banner. But his most championed work, because, you know, you say a lot of things about the Clone Saga, but I don't know how championed it is, despite, I think, it being fairly enjoyable. But, again, his most championed work, at least amongst 90s Spider-Man fans, is the underread, I would say, Sensational Spider-Man, where he worked alongside the legendary artist Mike Wieringo, also known as Ringo, to tell his own ongoing story of our favorite web spinner. Since then, he's been the lead writer on titles like Marvel Age Spider-Man and Marvel Age Spider-Man Team Up, and even contributed a story to Amazing Spider-Man 663. That was, I think, one of the first anti-Venom issues where Spider-Man and Wraith fight. So, kind of like run the gamut of the mid-90s to the kind of late aughts. Mark, how familiar were you with Todd Dezago's work? Had you read Sensational Spider-Man?
I have, over the years, reread the Clone Saga. Like you, I think that there are elements of it that are misunderstood. It's funny, you know, we talk about being a part of the Dark Ages, but, you know, this is what we're talking about with the Clone Saga now. Is just to go to the show that 25, 30 years later, we might all look back on things that are happening today and say, oh, I guess it wasn't that bad. Take that context for which you will. But no, I was familiar with Dezago. I don't think it's funny. I don't know if just because of how chaotic that period was, both in the Spider office and just in Marvel in general, I don't know if I ever thought about Todd's work in terms of like this is a Dezago comic, you know what I mean? So I'm very fascinated to get into this interview and kind of hear how he took it and his approach and where they went from there.
And I'm sure we'll talk about it when we're on, but like I really do want to champion his Sensational Spider-Man run. I think, like you said, it starts off very chaotic because it starts in the midst of the Clone Saga and all that stuff. But once it like settles into being a Spider-Man comic, it really like gets to champion some fun stories, some new supporting cast members, and you know, Mike Wieringo brings a signature style to it, and Todd is very funny. And so if you haven't read Sensational Spider-Man, I think you can listen to this interview without having read it, but I would encourage you, check it out. A lot of it is on Marvel Unlimited, and it's been collected, so I do think that if you get the opportunity to do so, you should. But in the meantime, let's get to our interview with Todd Dezago.
Well, now let's meet one of our amazing spider friends, the kind of guy who goes to other friends who recommend. Find out about the things they created. You'll love them so much that you wish you dated. But you're just friends, they're an amazing friend. A friend, a friend, a friend, they're an amazing friend.
All right, well, welcome back. We are now joined by none other than Todd Dezago. Todd, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk.
Thanks for having me, you guys.
Todd and I had the fortune to meet at Baltimore Comic-Con this year, and I've long been a fan of the Sensational Spider-Man run that you did with Mike Wieringo, and so it was a pleasure to see you there. I love the Baltimore Comic-Con. It's been like a decade since I've been because I moved out west. But what was your experience of the show? Did you are you a frequenter of Baltimore?
Every single year, I am not allowed not to go. I become friends, very good friends with the organizer, the creator of the show, Mark Nathan, and his wife Shelley and their family. Brad Tree is the guest coordinator and invites all the writers and artists that he has in. He and I are very good friends. He actually grew up in my area, and I didn't know I knew him when we were kids. And over the years, we've gotten to know, gotten to hang out more and really hang out. So yes, the Baltimore Comic-Con, and I describe it as a well-oiled machine. They have set things up so that there are people who are responsible for all things, and these people are at the top of their game. So as a guest of the show, I am never caught short. I'm never surprised by, oh no, we don't have a room for you or something. It's really a great show and a happy, fun show. It's one of those shows that's still devoted all to comics. Yep. They'll have a couple of celebrity guests, but they usually are celebrity guests that come from television shows about comics or science fiction or fantasy. And but mostly the focus is on comic books and the people who love them. I love the Baltimore show.
It's also very low pressure. I feel like you can just walk up to any of your favorite creators and just have a conversation. It's not like the packed, crowded halls. And I'm sure they would love for it to be that way. But I really like the kind of easygoing, nature of it. And again, like the very comics oriented, thing there. I've gotten so many, interesting relationships born out of, just going to Baltimore and striking up a conversation with someone.
So Todd, we want to kind of kick things off formally here by asking you a question we like to ask everyone here, which is, can you tell us about your origin story as it relates to comics, Marvel, and Spider-Man?
That is very cool. It's a conversation that I had. I just came back from the Motor City Comic-Con in Detroit, where I was hanging around with a bunch of friends. We were having dinner together, and we were talking about how every person who breaks into comics is a unique unicorn, because anybody who asks you later, how did you get into comics, they could never duplicate it. Everything is just very unique. That as soon as you get in, they slam the door and say, nobody's getting in that way again. I was friendly with Scott Lobdell, who was writing the X-Men. We had gone to college together. We had been involved in both the theater department and the newspaper, the college newspaper. For years, we would talk about comics because we loved them. We were passionate about them. And then suddenly he got a job in comics. I had gone to school. I had furthered my education to become an actor. And so I went out to Hollywood for 2 years. And as soon as I got there was a writer's strike. And the writer's strike of '88 shut everything down, and Hollywood just kind of evaporated. So I was out there thinking, I'm not doing what I wanted to come here to do, and I didn't really, I was a little homesick. So I came back home and got together one day with Scott, and Scott said, you used to come up with some good stories. You should pitch some stuff. Marvel's looking for writers. And I did not want to ride anybody's coattails in, and not Scott's. And so I wanted to do my own, so I started pitching stories to DC Comics. And I was pitching things to Archie, to Andy Helfer, to Kevin Dooley, and getting some response. But of course, one day I went to the city and Scott kind of dragged me into Marvel. And I ended up being plunked down in the offices of Kelly Corvasi, who was an editor at the time. And we just kind of started talking. And he said, well, why don't you write an inventory story for me? And I did. And he was editing X Factor among many other X books, and he said, "Write me an X Factor inventory story." An inventory story, for people that don't know, is a story that's kind of evergreen that you can slide in at any time in case the regular writer and artist are somehow late. So it was kind of just to keep it on the back burner. But as I was writing this story, JM DeMatteis decided he was going to quit the book. And I had met him once or twice in our local comic book shop because he lived near me. And when Kelly said, well, who am I going to get to write this? JM said, Todd can do it. And suddenly I was on an X book. And I don't know how that happened, and neither did Bob Harris. Bob Harris went, who is this guy? And so I was on it for almost a year when I got and people were liking my dialogue. They liked the patter that I had. And suddenly the Spider-Man offices were knocking on the door, and they were saying, would you come down and work on some Spider-Man? And Spider-Man, I just jumped. And they offered me, I did some fill-in work. I scripted over several of Tom DeFalco's plots. I'm sure you know that the Marvel style is you do the plot first, then the artwork comes, and then you put in the dialogue. So I was dialoguing a few of Tom DeFalco's books, and then Howard Mackey, who also lived in my town. It was very strange that JM lived across the river and Howard Mackey lived in my town, and was very upset that he wasn't the only comic book writer in town. This day. Yeah. Yeah. He was upset because we would go out. I would go out with him and his wife and kids, his little kids, and everybody in the town knew me. And he was like, "What are you, the mayor?" And it was kind of like that. But anyway, he knows a lot more people now. He's fine. But he and Tom DeFalco called me up and they said, "Listen, they're going to offer you Web of Spider-Man. Take it. We're about to do something really exciting with Spider-Man." And I said, "Okay." And it was the Clone Saga. It was very exciting.
Well, let me ask you about that, because you kind of came in the midst of that. You kind of weren't necessarily there, by my understanding, for the early decisions of it, and kind of picked up after that kind of shoe had been dropped, so to speak. What was it like kind of joining in after that decision and then kind of riding the whirlwind that were the next couple of years?
That is a great way to phrase that, Dan. It was, as I said, these guys called me up and I was suddenly brought into the Spider-Man meetings, and they had already, notoriously, Terry Cavanaugh came up with the idea to bring the clone back in. And then Terry and the editor that was on Web of Spider-Man, I was being offered the book because Terry had been technically fired because he was bumping heads with the editor on Web of Spider-Man. So I came into that and they were saying, well, Terry came up with this idea, but he's gone. So it was Howard, Tom DeFalco, at the time JM DeMatteis, and me. And I came into these meetings, and of course, I was a kid and starry-eyed. All these guys were, I kind of knew them, but my gosh, I'm working at Marvel Comics, and I'm working on Spider-Man. How is this happening? And I really was in kind of a fugue state for a little while. But I came into the meetings and I would listen and I would kind of offer a couple ideas, but I laid low. They were all kind of treating me like three uncles that were like shepherding me through and making sure that I didn't do anything wrong. I would get ready to say something and Howard would shake his head like, "Don't say it. I know what you're going to say. Don't say it." And they were really great. They were wonderful for me. And then, yes, all of this had been implemented, but really I was there when the clone arrived. I was working on another story and the clone arrived. Now, I originally heard the story that the original plan was it was going to take 6 issues. Then recently Tom told me, no, it was going to be maybe 2.5 months over the course of 10 issues. And then somebody said, no, Ben Reilly was never going to be named. He was going to get the clone in and out, get Peter and Mary Jane out. So I don't know, and I plan to sit down with all of them and really hash it out and see who, is the last survivor in that battle of what actually happened. But as a person who was involved and in there as it was happening, it was the salespeople who came down and say the fans love the clone. The sales went through the roof when the clone arrived, and everybody had an idea that this was happening, that something big was happening, and the sales went through the roof. The marketing guy said, "Keep this going," and the editorial guy said, "Can you draw it out a little bit? Can you draw it out a little bit more?" And every couple of months it would be, well, we're going to plan a little bit longer. So 2.5 years later, we're gasping, all 4 of us. JM DeMatteis left and came back in that time. He'd had enough of being told, you can't write an end. As you guys are both writers, correct? You need a beginning, middle, and an end to be able to tell a story. And they were not letting us come up with an end. Every time we'd come up with an end, we would get there and they'd say, "Now twist it and do something different." Oh man, I was kind of charged as everybody got fatigued in this situation because I was the dialogue guy. I ended up writing much of the dialogue. They kind of had a unanimous decision that one voice would be better to keep the books together. So I did a lot of the dialogue through the Clone Saga. In most cases I was credited. In some cases because of financial reasons, other people had that, but all 3 of them were saying, no, Todd can do it. It's fine. Let him do it. It'll be okay. You were happy to get out.
So in the midst of this, like, what were some of the discussions, do you recall, around, like, I guess, like, who and what Spider-Man was or was going to be, and, like, what were some of the opportunities that you and the team saw in terms of embracing Ben Reilly as Spider-Man? And then, I guess, like, another part of that is that, and then how did that evolve into saying goodbye to Peter? Like, do you kind of recall how that all shook out?
I do. I have a great memory for this because as a fan, I was just amazed that this was the way things worked, and it wasn't until later that somebody said, "No, that's not the way it works." I think it was no secret that Marvel had realized that Peter Parker had lost his attraction. We all read Teenage Peter Parker and went, that could be me. He was the most identifiable comic book character ever. He was the guy that we could all be. And things didn't go well for Peter. He was a loser. And it was that made him even more appealing because we all went, well, I could do better than that. I can do those things. But the idea that Peter was married to Mary Jane, who was a supermodel technically, the fact that he had just sold his book on the Spider-Man photographs, the coffee table book, and was making big money on it, made him no longer the guy that we could identify with. So Marvel said, we've got to get him back to the roots. How do we do that? And they were pitching around all kinds of ideas, and it was Terry Cavanaugh who came up with the idea of, hey, what if the clone was brought back and we decided that the clone was the real Peter all along, and now he's unmarried, he's poor, he's he's new, everything was happening, and give him a brand new start. And so that's what they decided to go with. That was the plan.
That big change would have played out over that small a number of issues, or whatever the disputed number is. Like, was that always the idea? I mean, because it seems as though it's like an idea that evolved almost like several months into the Clone Saga. It was like, well, here's a backdoor way to get rid of Peter, but that was the desire all along.
Well, the idea was to get rid of Peter as soon as they could. And remember, there was not going to be a Ben Reilly. We were not even going to name this guy. It was going to be such a quick change to reboot the franchise. The idea wasn't let's work on the story. It was let's make the change as fast as we can, and this is an overnight deal. Peter and Mary Jane and the clone come together. The clone says, "You're pregnant. You're about to have a brand new responsibility. You have put in so many good years here. Let me take over. Why don't you go someplace safe? Go out west. Go someplace else and be anonymous and just be a person and don't feel that you have to be responsible anymore." And I thought that was sweet. I thought that was beautiful. And it would be a good way to change it. Now, of course, we three as Spider-Man fans would have gone, "Oh no, I don't dig that. I don't like that at all. That is not cool."
It's only slightly more elegant than what they did with One More Day.
Exactly.
The literal, devil making the switch.
Changing everything. But it was the same premise, and I kind of think that One More Day was one of the ideas that was pitched back in the day when they were trying to figure out how to make Peter young and poor again. I keep saying poor. Just scraping, because that was a little more believable and understandable. You had another part of that question that made me think of something. As it was progressing, it was, to me, very evident that we had an opportunity. Once we named Ben Reilly, and once the Scarlet Spider became this separate character, what I saw in it was Peter had always been alone. He had always been a loner and a loser. I keep saying loser. I don't mean that in a bad way.
Right, but
Peter had only been,
struggle. He's on the struggle bus.
Sure. But now we had an opportunity to have him have someone who's even closer than a brother, someone who shared so many memories of his that we could form this bond and do this thing. And someone said to me, I did an issue, and it was with Luke Ross, did the artwork, where Peter and Ben went through all of the old chests and photographs and things in Aunt May's attic, that Aunt May had in the attic. And that was a bonding moment, and people said that was when Ben Reilly became real, because you saw the differences between Peter and Ben, but you also saw that they were just so happy to have each other, no matter what was going to happen.
I love that scene. I wanted to bring it up myself. It's one of my favorites. I guess I'm curious on a similar note. This era was known for its cross-title stories, one-shots, like whether it's the Jackal's journals or what have you. And everything was always ever evolving across this whole saga, kind of one issue at a time. Like there was no inessential Spider-Man book, to the point that I couldn't keep up with it because I didn't have the money to buy every issue that came out like every week.
Right.
But I'm curious what it was writing during that time. I mean, there's a lot to be made of the whole like brand new day writer's room like TV format. But like here you are kind of like scripting over these plots from JMD and Tom DeFalco. And every issue is kind of essential to continuing the story. Like you can't just read Amazing Spider-Man and really follow it fully. Like how did you guys kind of manage that? I know that the Clone Saga gets like crap for being like all these different ideas, but it is still fairly cohesive in its storytelling. So like how much did you guys know about what the other guy was doing? How much of that was planned out, and what were your kind of like ways of managing that?
Oh, we did. We had regular meetings, and usually they would be down in New York City at the Marvel offices, and they had, I'm sure you've seen photos of it, they had this beautiful conference room with this beautiful conference table and big spider web doors on it. And we would go down, usually, sometimes, JM and Howard and I would drive down together. And now neither one of them will ever ride with me again. But that's just because I drive aggressively, and that's how you have to drive in the city.
I was going to ask if it was like flatulence or something like that.
No. We would go down and we would have meetings. I think we had meetings once a month, but we were on the phone. And this was back in the day when you could, I guess you can still do it. I just don't do it anymore because we have different phones. This was back when on your phone you could have the hook flash and you could, dial another number. You could have two lines on your phone. And I don't remember JM doing it too much, but Howard, and who was in my town, Howard and Tom DeFalco and I would hook flash each other and get off this hours-long phone call with the editorial staff, and they'd all be sitting at a table around a speakerphone, and we would be holding our phones to our ears. You ever hold your phone to your ear so long that it starts to heat up? I mean your head starts to heat up, not the phone. We would be, our ears would be melting, and we would be complaining to each other because you're talking about all these ideas, and you've got 7 editors in there who are all throwing in their ideas and saying this, and what if we do that? We, in the meantime, we need to be let go so we can write this stuff down, so we can work. And we were just so frustrated with them because they weren't really listening to us say, let's make a decision and trim this down. Well, what about this thing? Well, what about that? Oh, it was crazy. So yes, but we did usually know what we had mapped out outlines constantly, and I'm pretty sure that in the beginning it was we writers who were making up the outlines of what was going to happen from this book to this book to this book, and those would all be everybody's ideas. Kind of, nobody really says this about Tom DeFalco that much, but Tom would sit back and listen to everybody's ideas and say, here's a way where we could do all of that. And he still is a genius, a mastermind at being able to see the big picture and being able to fold everything in together so that it all is usable and would all work. And I think it's one of the reasons why he was just, and still is, just a great editor. He really knows how to be encouraging, and he really knew how to see things and make the most of them, make them all work. But we would, after a while, I think it became some editor's job to make the notes and send those notes out to know what we were going to be working on from issue to issue to issue. My job as the dialogue guy, in most cases, of course, we were all working from Jim Shooter's rule that every issue is the first issue. And during the Clone Saga, that was really hard to keep up on. And Marvel at the time was doing that, like you'd flip open the cover and it would have what happened last issue or what's going on or the story so far. And that was cool, but it just became such an octopus of, this tentacle and all these different things are folding together. And who is Gaunt? We didn't know. We who is we would be bringing in these different ideas. And in some cases, it was these characters were developed out of desperation because marketing was saying, keep this going. Who was the character? I remember that Stan was in town when we were trying to figure out how to finally end things. Ralph Macchio had come in as the editor because this had become so unwieldy. And Ralph came in, and he was the editor that was going to help us clean it all up and make it all work. And we were trying to figure out who was responsible, who was the big bad guy behind all of this stuff, because it had to have been some kind of conspiracy. Had to at this point, because there was just so much had gone on. And Stan sat there and said, the only books that I still read are Spider-Man. I can't keep up with all the other things. I don't know what else is going on, but I'll always read Spider-Man. And so we were all very proud, and we said thank you. And he said, I really think that it definitely needs to be Norman. You got to bring Norman back from the dead, and he has to have been behind this, Norman Osborn. He has to have orchestrated all of this. He's the only one who would be that brilliant and insane to keep all these chess pieces in place. So we said that was pretty much where we were leaning anyway, but thanks. And so that kind of sealed it, and we were able to kind of put an end to it. So sorry, I feel like I talked too much.
No.
No.
And I don't think I've ever heard that wrinkle that Stan had some input on Norman. I mean, I've heard, that story before in terms of like, oh, we got to figure something out. Oh, it's got to be someone big. What about Norman? But like, I think hearing ownership to Stan, had you heard that before, Dan? That was news to me.
No, I'd never heard that.
Yeah,
That's fascinating.
I think those guys had already said it.
Yeah.
I think Stan was just corroborating. They were saying, was it going to be Doc Ock? Was it going to be Norman Osborn? Was it going to be the Chameleon?
Right.
And I think everybody was kind of leaning towards
Norman
anyway. But Stan, said, boys, I think it's got to be this.
It's got to be Norman, Yeah.
At what point for you personally, Todd, did you kind of feel like you guys had gotten ahead of your own skis?
Oh, I would say that when we were a year into this, I think Tom and Howard and I think we were looking, and as I said, JM left. He said, I can't really do this anymore. I've got other opportunities, and I need to go out. So I was writing for a while. I was writing both sensational and spectacular for I think a year, which was great because I got to work with Sal Buscema, and I was working with Luke Ross. I was working with Steve Butler for a while. So I got a chance to work with a lot of great people, but they were. We were trying to figure out what was going on, and when JM left, Tom and Howard and I kind of looked at each other like, should we leave en masse? Should we just go? Because they're not letting us stop. They're not letting us do this. It's like they had us on a treadmill and we were going to be running until we died. And there were times where it was just disheartening to come up with this great idea to finish things up. We're going to do this, and this is going to be the finale. And they would say, yeah, but what if you added this on? And we were disheartened.
Do you feel like you had any say in the conclusion in terms, as it was kind of careening or barreling into its, finality, or do you just feel like you just kind of lost autonomy at that point?
We were fighting for our own voice. I'm going to say the three of us, and then, as I said, JM came back during that time to Spectacular. But I think that we were coming up with all the ideas. It was like we needed to write it out and say, well, do you like option A or option B? We were shopping it around rather than being writers who were just going ahead and saying, this is our vision. This is what we want to do. Yeah. Marketing was on there. And it was really the first time, I think, that marketing really came down into editorial and started calling the shots. Now it's commonplace for that to happen. But I know that when the whole Clone Saga started, Danny Fingeroth and Bob Budiansky were co-editors of the Spider-Man group, and they were kind of being bullied into doing this, into letting the marketing guys who were just doing their jobs, but they shouldn't have had that big a voice in the actual direction of the stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you mentioned that you got to work on Spectacular Spider-Man, and you had a pretty solid little run there. Towards the end of that title, working with Sal Buscema, who had a seminal run on that book just a few years earlier. But it's also exciting because you had Bill Sienkiewicz and Jimmy Palmiotti doing the inks, and Bill Sienkiewicz over Sal Buscema is a very strange. I don't know if it's a peanut butter and chocolate situation, but it's two people whose styles may be completely different, creating this wholly unique thing. And then you have Jimmy Palmiotti, who is not someone I think of as channeling Bill Sienkiewicz, but he's doing his best there to kind of keep up with that style. And so it's a really actually interesting time on the book. But I am curious, one, for you to talk about those creatives, but also for a long time, Spectacular was the reigning second Spider-Man title, and then it kind of ended, and it's come back once, in the past decade, but that was kind of the end of that title, for what it originally was. I guess I'm curious about what it was like to see that book kind of end and the conversations around that. And anyway, can you talk about working with some of those guys and what it was like to be on the end of Spectacular Spider-Man?
What I remember as the writer that was in there, again, we were just following how the story was going and what was going on, and I was always trying to put my own stamp on things, just on one story here or there. I'd try to get my voice in because I realized that this was this big steamroller rolling over us. To me, Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, when it came out in 1975, was, oh man, what a cool idea. There's going to be 2 Spider-Man books. Not really thinking that over at DC there were 2 Superman books, there were 2 Batman books already. But the fact that Spidey had earned that, and man, what a great launch that had been back then. So I did have a big feeling, a big sense of history as I was working on that. Of course, we didn't know that they were going to end that book with the end of the Clone Saga. We didn't know that that things were going to happen the way they did. During the kind of the final days of the Clone Saga, when Mike Wieringo came in, he and I had decided, well, Amazing is the classic book. It's the vintage book. It's the book that Tom DeFalco was writing, and it had all your classic characters, classic villains showing up. Howard at the time was going through a real gangster, wanted to know about the gang influence, meaning the mafia type of stories. He was a big Godfather. He was really channeling the Godfather a lot in the stuff that he was doing, and he was building that arm of the Spidey universe. That there was that, and of course JM DeMatteis was doing more deep psychological introspective stories. Peter's voice was always kind of an inward seeking, trying to learn things. So when Mike Wieringo showed up,
and all of that,
when Mike, and I love that stuff. I love all of those different flavors of Spider-Man. When Mike Wieringo and I got together, we both clicked and said, things are so dark in comics. Everything since The Dark Knight Returns, it seemed like everything was dark. Everything just turned to grim and gritty. And we wanted more of our old Marvel team-up kind of flavor. So if you read our book, it was a lot lighter. I just shifted from your question about Spectacular to Sensational. I'm sorry about that. But going back to Spectacular, yes, I was honored to be working with Sal. I loved working with Sal, and of course he was a legend then. And so it was a little intimidating at first, but once I got to know him and we developed our own language of what we wanted to do, we had a lot of fun. But as far as I said, we didn't know it was that everything was winding down. I think right after the Clone Saga was when John Byrne did was it chapter 1 Was that the name
Yeah.
of it?
Yeah.
Chapter 1.
And Howard stayed on the books to give them some consistency, some continuity. But mostly John Byrne was being John Byrne, just making it all his own, and that's great too. But I was, once it was over, I was like, oh man, I'm glad that finally, we finally put an end to it. So I think more exasperation on my part. And Mike Wieringo and I went into the offices and said, look, we'd really like to do, if we can do a separate Spider-Man book that would kind of relaunch the series as of 2000. Like, we'd like to start Peter back in high school. We'd like to tell the story for a new generation. We'd reintroduce all the villains. But we'd set it all now so it was more contemporary than reading the old classic stuff. And Marvel said, we will never do that. We are never, ever going to do that, until 8 months later when they launched Ultimate. And Mike and I went, that's really funny. So anyway, that's the story of that. Sometimes you come up with a great idea and they use it somewhere else.
So when you did end up, when Sensational did kind of get the green light, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit in your last question, but like, what was the, if it wasn't going to be a reboot or a back to basics, what was kind of the vision for Sensational when compared to some of the other Spider books? Was it supposed to be a different vision, or was it just like more, just swapping out Web of Spider-Man for another book kind of a thing?
Well, cancel Web of Spider-Man because we're going to get Dan Jurgens, who's going to write and draw Sensational Spider-Man. They named it to give, to celebrate Dan coming in and doing a brand new book, but it was in the midst of the of the Clone Saga. And Dan came in and they kind of gave him the bait and switch, which is why he only lasted 6 episodes on Sensational. And I have absolutely all respect for Dan, because he said, look, you told me I was going to be able to come in and do Spider-Man, and now I'm doing who is Ben Reilly, and what is going on here. You didn't really, and it was because this thing had just gotten out of control. They could have had Dan doing Spider-Man for, who knows, he loves the character, but it didn't work out that way. And I really do respect him for saying, you know what, I'm going to go. You told me I was going to do one thing, get to do this, and it's not what's happening here. It was a mess. And having Dan come into those, I didn't really know him that well. I've gotten to know him better since then, but I could see him in the meetings, and just the look on his face was, wait a minute, this does not, I would look across the table at him and just see him going, this isn't what I signed on for. Yeah. And that was that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that goes to my next question, which is like, you took that book over eventually, but like there was so many shuffling status quos within your first few issues. They're keeping up with like the kind of Clone Saga of it all. Can you speak to kind of like reining that title in and finding your vision amidst such constant change?
When I look at it now, we really only had one issue where we had to do, where we had to really talk to the Clone Saga. Ralph Macchio had come in by then. I was contacted. I was scripting several of the books, and I was writing Spectacular, and Ralph called me up and he said, listen, Mark Waid and Mike Wieringo are going to come and take over Sensational. And I said, wow, that's great. I was already friends with Mark Waid. I had never met Mike, but I loved his work on Flash. And so I said, yeah, this is going to be great. And Ralph said, but Mark can't come in till issue 8, and we need an issue 7. Can you write an inventory story with Mike and do it with Mike Wieringo? I've told this story many times. I'm sorry if I'm boring people. Yeah. And so I said, yeah, give me his phone number. So I called Mike Wieringo out of the blue, and I said, listen, I'm going to do this fill-in issue. Who would you like to draw? And he said, is this a joke? is this a trick? Nobody's ever asked me who I wanted to draw, who's going to be in the story. I said, well, it's a one-shot. You know, we're just doing this one issue, but won't you have more fun drawing a character you want to draw? And he said, yeah, but no one ever asks you that. So he and I went back and forth, and we became friends in that one call. But we landed on the looter, who had not been seen for a while, and he was nuts. The character is delusional. So I was like, that's right up my alley. So that kind of set the tone of what we were doing. When it was revealed that Mark Waid wasn't going to be able to come over at all, they asked Mike who he wanted to work with, and he said, Todd, he lets me do whatever I want. So we really had a great collaborative relationship, and that's where we set the tone, that we said, let's do things that are a little lighter, a little more old school, in the sense that sometimes old comic book stories, one thing I always loved was sometimes things would just be so coincidental, you'd say, oh, come on. And we did that a couple times, but that's what we were looking for. We were trying to bring back fun, and we did get pretty nice commentary on it.
I gotta say, while we're talking about the looter, I love your looter stories. The one where he has the meteor gun that is completely non-functional is like one of the funniest bits that I've read in a Spider-Man comic.
Thank you.
A tip of the hat to your Norman Fester writing. So there you go.
Todd, can you expand a little bit more about your partnership with Ringo? I mean, obviously since his passing, he's been, and even before, he was always been celebrated as this like beloved creative, you know, the ultimate like guy you wanted to work with in this industry. But you know, you had the opportunity to work with him probably almost as much as anyone, you and Mark Waid. So what was like your specific process with Ringo like, and what did you find so unique about his work?
His work, first of all, he was being influenced by manga and anime, and you can really see it in his earlier work, that he was trying to kind of funnel some of that into it. There's big eyes and big feet and big hair. Impulse, the character Impulse over at DC, is probably Mike personified, because that was what he was kind of looking at and trying to bring in. But with Spider-Man, it just made for this more lively. I mean, that the panels are full of energy. They've just got this livelihood to them. He was a really good friend of mine. He had recently been through a divorce. I had just been through a divorce, so we bonded in that way too. That we were a couple of lonely comic book nerds that were hanging out at home. He lived in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, and I lived upstate New York. And we would be on the phone on Thursday nights in between all the shows on Must See TV, Friends and Seinfeld and whatever. Just, oh, that was funny, that was good. Sometimes we'd watch it. It was almost like in When Harry Met Sally, where they're watching shows on the phone and talking about it. So I know that sounds a little crazy, but we did that kind of stuff. But he was one of the nicest people I ever knew. He was very kind, and he was very compassionate, in the sense that the word compassion means that you can feel someone else's, not just their pain, but their joy. And Mike always remembered, and I got it, he always remembered the times when he was a struggling young artist. So whenever we would go to a convention, he invited me to Charlotte the first time, and he said, I always go for a walk over to artists, to the indie island, where all the independent people who had to pay for tables were there. He said, I try to go over there and encourage as many people as I can, because I've been there, I've done that. And many times people would say, hey, how much would it cost, Mike, for you to do a cover for us, to do a variant cover or the cover for their book? And he would say, oh, well, here's my phone number. Give me a call. We'll talk about it. And invariably, so many people have stories about Mike doing covers for them and just saying, don't worry about it. pay it forward, let it go. Do
Wow.
when you're big, you help out someone else who's coming up, because we're all going to be there. We'll all do that. And he did it so many times. I've had so many people come to me and say, Mike did our cover for free. And I shake my head and nod like, yeah, I know. And I was there a lot of times when he would do something like that. It was all about nurturing. He would be on the DeviantArt website, these early websites where artists would go and talk. And Mike would be there and be able to tell people what it was like. As he was going through the process. He would look at the first couple issues of his Flash, and his brother Matt is a dear friend of mine too, and has run started the Ringo Scholarship. So he's at the conventions a lot too. And Matt and I both laugh because Mike would talk and encourage people on DeviantArt where they were posting their pictures, and so many other people will come up to us and say, "Oh, he was my friend on DeviantArt."
Wow.
Or some of the other message boards that were around back then. Just a very kind and nurturing person.
It's funny you mention you guys watching sitcoms like on the phone together, because I kind of see a lot of the kind of like sitcom like sensibilities and creative timing in your work. I think you wrote, at least for me, the funniest scene I've ever read in a Spider-Man comic, which is Peter and Ben are at their apartment, and there's like, I think like a cousin or something that's coming in, and they can't be seen in the same room together. And then Seward Trainer, who is in like virtual space, starts showing up on the TV, and it's a kind of like a madcap zany scene that could only happen in a comic book, but feels like something straight out of a sitcom. I gotta hide you in the closet or whatever. It's so absurd that like it gets a cackle out of me every time. I guess I'm curious about your approach to Spidey humor. Like where that comes from and what you think is like the right style for the character.
I think that you can overdo it, and I might have done that. So I'm sure a lot of people look at that and go, "This is too silly." But actually, the story that you're talking about was one of the stories that Sal drew. And it was a story that Sal and I actually collaborated on to a certain degree, because he and I had theater in common. Sal has done a lot of theater and is really well known in his area for being involved in the community. I think there's 2 or 3 community troupes. He and I were talking about the plays we had in common, and I was working on a play that he had done years before called Noise is Off, which is a crazy British farce. Yeah. And it's one of those things where the doors are open, people don't know that other people are in the house, and they keep coming out saying, "Are there ghosts?" But it's it's like Three's Company or Frasier often was a big farce where things were just a big confusion. And Sal and I laughed and laughed and laughed on the phone, and I said, "I'm going to make the next issue a farce." And he said, "Okay." And so when I sent him the first couple pages, he called me up just roaring with laughter. And he says, "It's Noise is Off. We're doing it. We're doing it." So it was more for me and Sal to have fun than to worry about whether people thought it was too silly. But yeah, every time they turned around, something was going wrong. And when you have someone also compromised in that, it could be a lot of fun.
I mean, I could imagine that, like, if Stan were handling that, he would have had Peter turn to the screen and say, like, "Would any other superhero have to deal with this? Like a guy on my TV talking to me." Like it did feel quintessentially Spider-Man. Yes, silly, but it felt like a real Peter Parker problem.
Well, thank you
for them to solve. That's a favorite scene of mine. Yeah.
Thanks.
Another issue of yours that stands out to us that we wanted to ask you about was, there's on your Sensational run, there's a Christmas issue with Todd Knock, I think was the artist on that. And, within it, like, it's interesting to us is, Peter's religion, always kind of seems to be this sort of unspoken thing. And it's not that your story focuses on it, but you still kind of crafted this very touching Christmas tale between Peter and Billy. So I'm just curious, was this like a meaningful issue for you to be a creator on? Do you have any memories of working on it specifically?
I do, especially I think that was Todd's second fill-in for us, because Mike Wieringo would be able to do 3 or maybe 4 issues, and then he'd need time off. And because we were such good friends, and because Ralph Macchio kind of let me do what I wanted with the book, I would say, look, Ralph, Mike needs a couple issues off, so I'm going to do a 2-part story and bring in this person and bring in that. I was developing Young Justice over at DC, and we were unable to convince the editorial staff of who should be the artist on the book. And I love Todd Knock, and they said, we haven't seen his work. So I said, Ralph, I'm going to bring in Todd Knock to do this. I wanted to give Todd some more work so that we could show it to the people at DC, was really what was going on. But with that story and with what it was, Mike and I had this idea of doing another farcical type of story where Peter and Mary Jane go on a cruise, and the people that happen to be there, there's a group that are trying to smuggle, people there that are trying to smuggle, I think, diamonds. I don't remember exactly that part, but also on the boat, just to show you how wacky this was going to be, the looter was going to be there and Stan Lee was going to be there. This story was going to be just a wild Christmas treat for everybody. That was going to be another one of those kind of farcical, wacky things, and it wouldn't come right on the heels of the other one, so I wasn't doing it like every issue. The other one had taken place like a year and a half before that.
Well, you did manage to squeeze Stan into your -1 issue. Like, there's a kind of stand-in for him there.
Stan. It was an edict that all those issues, every artist drew Stan. In that it was supposed to open on Stan in every book in the Marvel books there. But we did have Stan, and Mike drew him, and I thought, that's great. And they sent it to Stan for approval, and Mike had drawn like the liver spot or 2 on his head, and Stan was very upset. He wanted that erased, and Mike was very upset because he thought, now Stan doesn't like me. Stan doesn't like me at all. So, but yes, as far as the Christmas story, I did want there to be. I had created. You were talking before about how much of a voice did I feel that I had in the whole Clone Saga thing. They're my ideas that show up. There are a couple characters that were partly my creation that showed up in the Clone Saga. But as far as what I wanted to do with Peter and what I wanted to do, I had a storyline that was going to include that character, Billy Walters, and it was going to be something bigger and more, hopefully, memorable. And because the Clone Saga was going on, and because Marvel was constantly pulling the rug out from under us, I never really got to realize that whole storyline that I was going to do with Billy. So what happened in the Christmas issue was really what I was kind of trying to get the sentiment around, and why not at Christmas, since it was kind of such a warm idea. So that's that. Sometimes you gotta shift gears and just change things and mix things up when you have a creative idea and you don't have any place to really put it.
I love what you did with Billy, regardless, with the idea of like, not only like someone tagging along with Peter in the way that like he used to have to duck out, and hide from people, but also that like this is a guy that like legitimately wanted to establish a new friendship with Peter and how difficult that was for him. And you also introduced this character of Hope, the next door neighbor that kind of knew that Peter was Spider-Man. And to my understanding, I don't know that story ever concluded like fully, other than Peter kind of realizing that Hope knew that. But can you talk about your kind of additions to the supporting cast? I always thought that they were a very like colorful crew.
I was amazed that no one had ever taken the web shooter position, which when you flip it around means I love you. In sign language. I'm sorry, I'm saying this. I'm putting my hand up and you guys can see it, but I realized, oh yeah, we're on the radio. It's the idea. the idea that, first of all, I like the idea of having Mary Jane being involved socially and trying to be involved in the community and trying to show that this was, I'm a very hopeful person, that we are, hopefully, all people are compassionate to a certain degree, and I wanted to try to show that Mary Jane was encouraging everyone to be a little more active in their community and do nice things. So when Hope was deaf, I'm trying to now I'm blanking on her mother's name, but that doesn't really matter. The fact that Hope was deaf and she made the symbol to Peter. She said, "I love you" to Mary Jane. Hope was a little girl who was probably 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah.
She makes the "I love you" symbol to her mother and to Mary Jane, and she keeps it up. And when she looks at Peter, she flips it around, so it's the web shooter move. I'm just saying this for the listeners. My idea was always that Peter was going to freak out because he said, this little deaf girl knows who I am. But what the story eventually turned out to be was she had seen Spider-Man go into their house and wondered, how did he get to be friends with Spider-Man? She never put it together, and so my plan was that Hope was always going to be this person that Peter would be friends with, but wait to see how long it would take for her to go, wait a minute, maybe you could be Spider-Man. I was hoping to do that in the long game, but I didn't get to have a chance to do that. Does that answer that question? What else?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, Mark's got the next question.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
No, all good. I think sausage making was happening here. So I also want to ask you about Identity Crisis. Now you were part of the kickoff for that story, which allowed Peter to avoid the danger of his Spider-Man persona after he had been framed for murder by Norman Osborn. And these identities have kind of gone on to have lives of their own. I mean, we actually saw them during the Beyond storyline recently.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about how that the ideation behind that story and kind of your role in pushing that forward?
I think we all said he's going to take on 4 different identities to do this. He's going to do it 4 times, and someone and I remember this was one of those times when Tom DeFalco went, "That's ludicrous. That's just stupid that he would do 4 different times for the 4 different books. Each one of us was going to get to do it." Now, each one of us was really eager to go and do our version, so it was easy for us to go, yeah, okay. But the idea that he would take on 4 different identities to try to keep Norman from recognizing it was silly. But someone in editorial said, well, he's really trying to keep Norman off his tail. So we went, all right, we'll go with that.
He kind of fails as Hornet almost immediately anyway, so.
Well, my relationship with Mike was also sometimes putting out the fire. Mike would get frustrated with some of the things that were going on. I'd like to point out that Rich Case, who was our inker, was in the same studio with Mike. They were basically passing the pages through the door to each other's, little studio area. And so I have to give Rich Case a lot of credit too for helping keep Mike in the boundaries. He would get frustrated by these editorial edicts that would, in the middle of our Doctor Strange crossover or guest starring story, Marvel said, we're going to do this -1 thing. And Mike was already looking forward to being done with this 3-issue storyline and then take a month or 2 off. And then when Marvel stepped up and said, you've got to do this flashback story, Mike blew a gasket. He goes, I'm not doing any more. I got to take some time off. I'm tired. And Rich and I were able to kind of massage him back into place. So to answer your story about the Hornet, when they brought that up, they said, you guys can do whatever you want. And Mike and I said, he's doing 4 different identities. Well, we're just going to be silly with this. We're going to do everything we can to have fun with it and be goofy. And Mike immediately, it seems like this is what this is looter talk more than spider talk. But Mike said, hey, can you bring the looter in again? Can we do the looter and just be silly and do silly things? And the looter showed up, which kind of immediately made the Hornet the laughing stock of the 4 different identities. He just, he kind of had it going wrong. I do think that there were some silly moments in that too that made it seem like we weren't taking it as seriously, but we had a lot of fun with the Hornet too.
It's worth it all for the image that Mike drew of Norman's face when he realizes that the Hornet is Spider-Man. It's like one of the all-time mean mugs the character has put forward. Yeah.
I was just reminded that so to become the Hornet, Spider-Man needs to fly, and so he goes to his friend Hobie Brown, who we all know as the Prowler. And they had talked just recently, and he said, do you have anything that could help me, to be a different kind of guy? He said, no, nothing. And Peter says, well, what's that? He said, oh, that's a jetpack thing, but, it weighs 300 pounds. And Peter just picks it up and puts it on his back, and he goes, no, this will be fine. So I like the fact that it demonstrated how strong Spider-Man is without really even dealing with it. But in the course of making the costume, he's got these metal gloves, and he's carrying Mary Jane through the sky. He's running away from Norman. Norman is nearby and kind of tracking him down, and Peter is the Hornet, and he's got Mary Jane in his arms, and they're flying through the air, and she's a little nervous, and she says, he says, something's stuck. I need to access it on the glove. I need to access the control on the glove, and I can't reach it because I'm holding you. And she says, what? He says, pull my finger. And she's, Peter. He said, no, pull it. That's how you disengage the rocket. So anyway, I got a pull my finger joke into Spider-Man, and I felt that was kind of fun.
That's after they do the Miracle on the Hudson thing, because he hits a bunch of birds. Yeah. So anyway,
there's a lot of craziness in that.
Yeah.
Todd, we're almost at the end here, but we one of the big questions we love to end our interviews with is, we like to ask creators, what does it mean to you personally to have contributed to the legacy of a character like Spider-Man?
I don't know that I have really processed that enough. I think that I've been in the business for 30 years now, which is a long, long time. And Mike Wieringo, after he passed away, our families kind of meshed together. It was really kind of strange. I met his mom the day after he died at his house, and my mom had died just the year before, and she hugged me and said, you lost your mom and I lost my boy, and now we're stuck with each other. And really, she kind of adopted me, and she adored my girlfriend. And Matt and I became like brothers, and the families just kind of came together. When I think about that, his mom once said to me, well, honey, she passed away 2 years ago, at about 70, I think she was 74. But she said, honey, we all think we're 21 years old in our head our whole lives. She said, I think I'm 21 years old now. And I was saying to her, when is it going to stop? When am I going to stop feeling like I'm 21? But the idea that I have done anything that will really be on the map is still surreal to me. After all these years, I can remember when the first issue of X Factor that I wrote came out, and I had become friends with the editor, Kelly Corvasi, and we still are very good friends. And it came out, and I called him up and I said, I just went to my local comic shop and I saw the issue I wrote. And are you guys playing a prank on me? Like, did you just put him in the stores did you print this up and put him in stores right around where I live just so that I'd think that I'm writing? And he said, no, man, you're it. And to me, again, it still feels like I'm an imposter kind of sitting around doing things. The fact that some of my stuff are the things that people like, that just is amazing to me. So yeah, it's still surreal. It's still hard to believe that I worked on these characters I loved so much, have worked with people that I honored and respected and idolized. Now a lot of them are my friends, and all of it is just very weird to me. I told you that I'm doing a podcast now, and I'm inviting all the people that I've gotten to know, the people who have become my friends over the years, to come in and tell me a little bit to tell me the stories that they've told me personally that I can share with everybody else. It started with Ramona Fraden, who passed away at the early part of this year. She and I were really good friends, and we go to lunch regularly. And I said to her, I'm thinking about doing a podcast where I talk to the people I know and let other people hear these stories. And she said, I'm 97, you better do it soon. And that's what was the impetus of this. And so now I know how hard it is for the job you guys are doing. And I have a lot of respect for you. 12 years of doing this, that is crazy. So it is, to me, it is a little incredible that I have had the career that I have. I count myself very, very fortunate.
Well, Todd, I wouldn't be a good podcast host if I didn't tell you to go back and tell us the name of your podcast.
Oh,
so people
man,
can
that's
listen.
funny.
Yeah.
It's called... That's a good idea. I am a horrible marketing guy. It is called Random Acts of Comics. We do a weekly interview and then a little question and answer with the people that I've become friends with over the years. So I don't have people on that I don't like, because I don't want to. I want to have nice things to say. No, that's not true. I like a lot of people. It's kind of a lighthearted, fun, positive, upbeat podcast. So, and I'll be talking about this on my next one, and you guys should come around and guest on that, because I'll ask some other questions besides what I asked you earlier.
Absolutely.
Well, we would love to do that. Do you have anything that you want to plug, your online presence, or any books or things you've got coming out that people should keep their eyes open for?
I am, so for 20 years, I've been working with my pal Craig Rousseau, who worked on Batman Beyond and Impulse and a bunch of other things, and is now currently working on Young Hellboy and the Herculoids. Craig and I have a comic book called The Perhapanauts that we are always working on, always doing more things. The idea is that I always loved cryptozoology and the weird creatures that are supposed to be out there that we've never seen. Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra. The idea is like the old X-Files. Maybe that's too much of a back reference for some people. The best X-Files episode.
Please don't
we're
make
right
me
here
feel
with
that
you.
old.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The X-Files, the best episodes were when Mulder and Scully would go out in the woods looking for some weird creature. This is about a secret government agency that sends out a team to confront these creatures, but the team is made up of a Bigfoot, a Chupacabra, a Mothman, a ghost. All kinds of paranormal things are thrown in there. It's a lot of fun. It's kind of family friendly and sometimes kind of suspenseful. I'm always working on that, and I'm working on 2 other creator-owned projects at the moment with a couple of great artists. John Burgeon is drawing a book that is kind of a memoir of my by me adventure during childhood. It's a lot of fun. And the other one is a book called Unmade that I'm doing with Eric Henson, who's a great artist. That is kind of a horror crime noir book that both will probably be out next year, 2025.
Well, we'll keep an eye out for that. Is there a place people can keep up with this stuff online, follow you or anything like that?
Random Acts of Comics has a website. I am still on Facebook, like old people are, and on Random Acts of Comics is on Instagram also, and that's it.
That's
Cool.
fine. More power
Well,
to you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I've been like, I need to get off social media. That's just me.
I have not embraced it. I never really thought it was going to catch on, and so I have laid very low. As I said, if I get distracted, I can't stay in my story. So I try every morning to get up, go to work, and not be bothered at least for a couple hours, so that I can actually get some work done. And social media to me is just a kind of a distraction more than anything else, and I like being as far away from it as I can be.
Yeah.
Put down your phones, everybody.
Well, Todd, I wish I had your strength.
It's tough. Yeah.
I know I could pick your brain for like hours and hours more about your Spidey work and stuff, but we just wanted to say thank you again for coming on the show. This was a really fun conversation, and let us peel back a little bit of corner of the world that we, I'm sure many people don't know a ton of the details behind. So it was great to just have you on, and I knew the minute I met you at Baltimore that I was like, Todd is going to be a really fun guy to have on the show.
Oh,
Yep.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. And as I said, I don't listen to a lot, but in preparation for this, I listened to a couple of your episodes. You guys have a really great dynamic, and it makes the show a lot of fun. I don't think that I'm as much of a Spider-Man nerd as you guys are. You guys are deep, true. I mean, I don't have every issue. I have what I have, but you guys are the true Spider-Man fans, and it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I think it was John Semper Jr. who once said of me, who ran the Spider-Man the animated series. He said, Dan has forgotten more about Spider-Man than I know. So, so there you go.
That's great.
I will just say the one thing that unites the three of us is we've probably all been insulted by Howard Mackey. So it's something that holds us together, right?
Because he's in town, and the studio where my partner Doug has the studio, Howard came in to do the interview, and Howard talks with his hands constantly, and we had him with headphones and a mic in front of him, and he Mackied the mic so many times. So now we call, whenever you hit the mic when you're recording, that's called Mackeying the mic.
There you go.
So
all right, well, put that one in the books for Amazing Spider Talk too, because Mark Mackey's the mic fairly regularly. So there we go. All right, well, thanks again, Todd. This was really fun.
All right, Dan. Well, it is time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to thank you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning into this episode of the Amazing Spider Talk. Plus, we want to extend another special thank you to Todd Dezago for joining us. If you haven't checked out his work yet, as we said in the intro, a lot of it is available on Marvel Unlimited and has been collected in various Clone Saga books, quite the tomes, if you will. As for Sensational Spider-Man, the individual issues are not particularly expensive, but they were also mostly collected in a trade called Spider-Man and Todd Dezago and Mike Wieringo, Volume 1, that sells for a reasonable price if you can find it, if that is of particular interest for you. And it should be, because they're fun Spider-Man stories, and now you know more about the person behind them. So, let's make it happen, people.
Absolutely. We're going to spike it onto the New York Times bestseller. What's this? Yeah. A late 90s Spider-Man book is suddenly shooting to the top of the charts. Thank you, Amazing Spider Talk. Anyway, this podcast exists because of the support of our listeners on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can shoot us to the top of Patreon's subscribers by supporting our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these interviews as soon as we record them, our single issue reviews, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. I will say, we've literally been recording these interviews and putting them up edited the very next day, and some of them won't hit the regular feed until over a month later. So if you want to get in on these things, really the Patreon is the way to do it. But in the meantime, we do say thank you to everyone who has already supported us and our work.
If you value smart comics criticism and historical analysis and great interviews, we hope you'll consider supporting us on Patreon. What we do on the show is admittedly niche. Still, we feel that we offer unique commentary and model fair methods of criticism for a character and medium that rarely receives that kind of fair method of criticism. So please, if what we do is valuable to you, or even if it's not, but you just got some money to spend, we can only continue doing what we do with your support on Patreon.
Yeah, I want to meet that person. That needs to be our target demo.
Money, please. No, I'm kidding, people.
Yes,
I'm not really
exactly.
doing that.
Yeah.
I'm not really doing that.
So, Mark, until we conduct our own gathering of the five between you, me, Alan, Alex, and Rick, what's our motto?
I feel like this is like a sitcom or a dramedy from the 90s with like Jennifer Love Hewitt, The Gathering of Five. Am I confusing things here? Anyway, our motto is, with great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.
Oh no, I chose death.
Waka waka.